Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this day-long symposium and conversations. I hope through what I'm going to talk about, I'm able to make a meaningful contribution to the kind of deliberations the university has hoped to initiate through this. So I am today going to talk not about my urban conservation projects, but about another aspect of my practice, which is really engaging with research and publication as a tool for advocacy, to build awareness, and using writing and the written word as an avenue to talk about heritage, placemaking, and communicate that to a wide range of constituents and audience, which may or may not directly be related to the field of heritage. So I kind of understand heritage is, there's this heritage sector where there are a whole lot of practitioners, professionals, the government, there are different stakeholders, but then there are the lay people, the people whose heritage it actually is, and many times there's a disconnect between, and publications and writing becomes a very important tool to kind of bridge that gap and bridge that disconnect that often happens. So I'm going to use two of my recent books published in the last year, and I'm going to also then circulate this later so y'all can look at it to kind of talk about this initiative next. So the first book is this one, which I will circulate. It's called Called Kolkata, and it's part of a larger sort of initiative called the People Place Project, where we look at people as the key stakeholders through which we understand our city, we live our city, and we transfer memories and associations about our city through the lives of the people who inhabited it. So yes, there are different aspects of a city like politics, culture, food, dress, festivals, buildings, but oftentimes histories are written by other people, and the voices of the people who actually live there, the human-centered stories, don't really come to the fore. So with that sort of intent, to also kind of, there were 4 pillars that kind of informs this book. There are about 55 stories, is really to have plural readings of the city, diverse readings of the city, inclusive readings of voices which otherwise may be lost or not included in a mainstream book like this, and also to make it human-centered. So to kind of look at the city from a bottom-up sort of a way, and not through institutionalized histories of books which are kind of readily available in the market. Next. So even for this, we kind of require the alternative methodology. Writers on Calcutta to come and contribute stories or their impressions. We kind of did this crowdsourced sort of a methodology of a call for writers, of an open call for writers to kind of share their story ideas, their experiences, what they think should be, what are the kind of stories that should be told about Kolkata, which are the lesser known stories, not the typical stories that kind of first come to your mind about Kolkata and its people. So it became a sort of research process, which then we had to kind of define for the people who were interested in contributing these stories. Next. So then what we had to do is, a lot of people expressed their interest, because Kolkata is that kind of a city where, everybody writes something, everybody likes to write a poem or a story, and so there was a lot of interest. But then what we realized that all the story ideas were kind of hackneyed, unbelievable bosta pacha stories, because everybody either wants to write about the Durga Puja or the taxi or the puchka, or things that everybody already knows about. And there's really, so how do you kind of twist it on its head and come up with new dimensions of a city, stories of the marginalized, stories of migrants, stories of a very violent political history that the city has had, of partition, of the artisans, of the other communities that kind of don't get a voice, along with obviously some popular aspects as well. So how do you kind of balance the popular and the lesser known and kind of give it a new voice? So we had to do these kind of interactions and workshops in Kolkata. So I kind of personally met a lot of them, did some workshops to how to really sharpen their story ideas. Next. So some we did by Skype. So it became this iterative process to kind of seed the idea. So I was like the curator editor for this book, and finally through this sort of process, how they went out into people. So the methodology we had is that you cannot create a fiction. You cannot just write about your idea of the city. It's a human-centered story. So you have to identify a person and interview that person through whose lens and through whose voice you're kind of revealing a salient aspect about Kolkata. So it's about people and place together. Next. So in the process, what we actually came up with were like 25 different writers who have contributed to this book, and only 3 to 4 of them would be established names who kind of write or have published in the past. Most others are actually people, so they're residents of the city, they have a stake on the city, they've lived there for generations, or maybe have lived and moved out to work somewhere, but there's still a very strong emotional connect with Kolkata. But most of them are first-time writers or bloggers or young voices, young college graduates, etc. So that also kind of blends a fresh lens to looking at the city, and that was one of the ways in which we thought a new sort of imagination can be created about Kolkata. Next. We also then peppered the book with different kinds of hand-drawn illustrations, and Kolkata is kind of seen in either photographs, and there are like n number of photographs of the city, or there are paintings which are kind of historic, archival, or people who kind of documented the city over time. But we wanted this kind of illustrative, again, so we did a call for illustrations, and lots of young people sent in their original artworks, which we then kind of curated in this black and white tone to kind of give a little bit of flavor to the themes that we were talking about. Next. So now I'll kind of quickly touch upon the 4 key themes, and I'm not going to go into too many of these stories. I hope you will look at the book and also like buy the book. It's so that you can kind of get a window into what we were trying to do. So the first theme becomes culture and continuum, where we're really looking at, there is an urban culture that Kolkata has historically been associated with. But today, in contemporary Kolkata, how are some of those cultural aspects, its cultural heritage, its cultural past being continued or not? So, and what are the sort of new urban culture that the city is seeing? So it's kind of trying to balance an urban culture that it has inherited with new forms of urban culture, and is it kind of at loggerheads with each other, or what is kind of happening to the urban culture of Kolkata? So this was one theme. Next. The second was really looking at Kolkata as a city, as a social tapestry. Historically, with all the sorts of communities that have come here in the past and made it a melting pot, and even in the last 50 to 60 years in the 20th century, social formations that have taken place with all sorts of migration, displacement, post-independence, currently with all the sort of migration stories taking place. There are several communities, some contentious, some kind of living harmoniously with each other. So we try to give each of these some sort of a place and a voice through their stories. The third is looking at the extraordinary every day, and this is a sort of a problem area for many of us, because when we talk about cities, we only want to identify the sort of cherry in the cake kind of stories, all the monumental things. We don't look at the minor things, all the people who kind of play supportive roles in our lives, and we kind of don't give their stories a center stage. So we try to curate some stories which are looking at absolutely ordinary aspects of the city, but that is what gives it and lends it character and continuity. And finally, the fourth pillar at strand of this book, which is really looking at the contemporary city, because Kolkata has this habit of kind of wanting to live in the past and harping in nostalgia, and everybody kind of soaks in and perpetuates that nostalgia, be it the locals or even the diaspora. So, and of course, I feel that the contemporary Kolkata is at kind of loggerheads with colonial Calcutta, and they're both kind of still trying to reconcile with each other. So we try to look at this aspect as what are the future aspirations of the city? How are new issues in the city like gender, LGBT rights, new kinds of aspirations, entrepreneurship, or the lack of it, new cultural spaces. So what is the contemporary city and where is Kolkata really heading? Who are the people who are driving it in that direction? So these are broadly, so that's the first initiative. Just go back one aspect. So the idea here has also to also democratize the idea of the city and the access to the city, because these are books which are very readily available in the main. They're not academic, they're like storybooks. It's an anthology of 55 stories, so it's also for everybody. You don't need to be a scholar, you don't need to have an interest in a particular subject to pick up this book, but it gives you a lens and an informed sort of view. So the second one I'm going to kind of talk about is kind of on the other end of the spectrum. So if people call Kolkata as a really people-centered, sort of bottom-up way of looking at cities, architecture, heritage, culture, identity, and what makes a place, this is kind of looking, and it's kind of more dynamic and fluid. This book, which is this size, it's like a guidebook, again easily available online and in the market, kind of looks at archaeological and monumental heritage that is again an important part of the landscape that we occupy. So this is a book on the Hoysala legacy, which was a dynasty from 12th to 14th century in Karnataka. And next, what we realized when we did a survey on the kind of books that exist on this region, they are primarily academic, they're very dense. It's because it's temple architecture and it's royal architecture, it's frozen in the past. Nobody really understands, or very few people even go there, other than the local sort of region. And it's very specific. So only scholars or people interested would want to know about the sculpture, the art, or scriptures or inscriptions. So it's very, very niche. So it kind of excludes a large number of people who want to or may access this. So we came up with this model to do a guidebook, a very simply written, non-Sanskritized, so that everybody can kind of access this and know about monumental archaeological heritage, which is also important, that we have to kind of balance the two, but make it more accessible and understandable. So I'll just quickly show you some pictures of these sites which are maintained by the Archaeological Survey of India, but its interpretation and dissemination to the common man is pretty much not there. And the temples, their architecture, the sculptures, the narratives, they're kind of high examples of Indian sculptural history, of all our Puranas, the Mahabharata, Ramayana, all of that is kind of narrated on these panels. And the fine, exquisite artistry that's there. So why should something like this only be for a regional audience or be for a very, very academic, scholarly environment? Next. So along with Dr. George Michel, who's considered world authority on South Asian architecture, we decided to kind of use the guidebook format to simplify and democratize and kind of make available this sort of information. So we were on site, documenting really through empirical work, and trying to see what are the aspects that we capture. So these are all drawings that we made in our notebooks during our field trips, and really filter out what this book needs to have to kind of convey to even the lay audience who might not know anything about, does not understand any of this jargon, but is interested in knowing about this region. So we came up with simplified sort of maps as to how to go there, what to see, what are the important aspects of doing like these day trips to the Belur temples, to the Halebeet temples. So I finally used this also as an educational tool where students and the young generation really begins to understand and feel a connection with their past. Thank you.